Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us, and we're happy to be with you with the Church of Fire. Hello Keith. Hello Frank.
All right, brother.
How are you guys doing?
Good.
Yeah, doing okay?
Yeah, very good.
Thank you all for joining us. Today we have a powerful testimony, and I love testimonies because they are so powerful, and they show that Christianity is not just an intellectual belief, but rather it is experiential. It's lived out. It's it's something that it's true and will resonate with you when you hear an amazing testimony. Today we have Brother Keith Doxey, and how long ago did I meet you, Keith?
I was trying to figure that out the other day.
Okay.
It must have been 8 years ago.
About 8 years ago?
Maybe so.
Okay, 8 years ago I joined a church, and somebody said, "Oh, you gotta meet Keith, he likes apologetics." Oh, great. And what we didn't know is we had met, right? Prior to that. Is that what it is?
We met afterwards.
Afterwards.
We met in Orlando.
So afterwards, we
Islam.
met in at the conference on Islam with Rabbi Zacharias International Ministries in Orlando, and then we became friends. And what the testimony you're about to hear is so powerful, because when I think of the testimony, I think of and then I'm going to let you tell your story, Keith. I think of Paul's words in 2 Corinthians chapter 1 verse 6, where it says, "If we are afflicted, it is for your comfort and salvation." And whatever we go through when we're believers, it is for somebody else's benefit. So our sacrifice is for somebody else. If we're faithful to Jesus, all of the evil that happens to us, and most probably if we are in Christ and we're followers of Jesus, we will have some evil happen in our lives. But it's not wasted. It's never wasted. It's evil. It's not from God. It's because of a curse, because of sin, because of the enemy that's trying to hurt us, because we are soldiers for Christ. But once we are following Jesus, all the evil, none of it is wasted. And as you're going to hear today, because of the affliction of one person, salvation came to Keith's family. So Keith, tell us a bit about yourself, where you're from, and so that people can find out who you are.
Sure. Well, I grew up in this area, and just to give you a little background.
Which is Florida?
Fort Myers, or just north of Fort Myers. And as far as being Christian, I grew up culturally Christian. Didn't know anything really about Jesus or who he was, but I knew, just what most people, I guess, in culture today really understand. But I was a good person. I thought I was a good person. I was a musician, and as a musician, I played in tons of churches, hundreds and hundreds of different churches as a professional. And I wouldn't say I was an atheist, really, but more agnostic. And then as I went to university, maybe drawn more toward atheism, as opposed
University will do that for you.
Yes, definitely. Be careful.
Yeah.
So anyways, as a musician, like I said, I played a lot of different churches. I'm talking like mega churches, like the Crystal Cathedral in Orange County, which is, I think it's Robert Schuller. And my friend was there. He was the regular trumpet player, and I would sub for him on occasion. First time I played there, hungover, and barely made the gig. Interesting though, in all the different experiences, no one's ever approached me about Jesus. And I was in the church. And in the church, I was surrounded, I would assume, some people were Christian, some people weren't. We never really listened to the sermon because, they always took the praise band out. I played at the Mormon temple up in Salt Lake City, several occasions they have a worldwide broadcast up there, toured it. Couldn't tell you the difference between Mormonism, Christian, or evangelical Christians and say Catholicism. I had no idea. To me, it was all the same. My experience with Christianity would be like on campus, where you had the street preachers, where they would yell at you, "Fornicator!" And they would, I'd scream back, "F you!" And then I was just, I was 18 and kind of dumb, and I had no idea what he was talking about. So I had no real basis for it. But like I said, so I played lots of those. And jump ahead, I was out in California a lot, and then my father got sick. And I was married and had my son Miles. He was a little boy, and I wanted him to grow up with an extended family. So we moved back to Florida so we could have that experience, which I treasure. the thought. And like I said, everything was going great. We had a wonderful family, I have a wonderful wife, and Miles is doing great. Typical he would go through when he was in high school. He would have low times, but nothing major, you know. And one day he had a friend who said, "Hey, I want you to come out to this youth group." And he said, "Okay." And this was a different experience from what I have seen other kids. And this youth pastor was serious, and they would talk about really deep topics, and they really delved into who Jesus was. And so I watched my son he would grow. I could see a difference in him, and he would say, you know,
How old was he at that time?
He was 16,
16.
17, yeah, 16, I guess, a little, half, 16 and a half. Anyways, he would say, "Hey, Dad, come on, let's go to church." And I say, "How much you pay, right? Because I don't go to church unless you know, I got to get a little money for this. It's my time." And then, of course, my wife would give me the evil eye, and I said, "Okay, I'll go." So I'd sit there, and you know, I would make fun of whatever the preacher, because he had 3 topics ready. 1, 2, ready, let's go. And I would say, "Miles, ready, let's go." And he's like, "Shut up," you know. So anyways, but like I said, so I watched him continue to grow, and there was something special, you know, that I saw. And I started to think about it, but still, everything was great. I didn't see a need for this. My only experience with the church growing up as a kid, one day we did a lock-in. You know what those are? In America, they take the youth groups and they put them in like a gymnasium, and they lock them in for the evening. We had this, it was like a little classroom setting, and they started talking about some really weird stuff, you know. As a kid, I was like, "Oh, you guys are like really out there." You know, I had no idea what they were talking about. That was my only experience. Jump ahead. So I saw this great change going on with Miles, and he kept saying, "Come on, Dad, let's go. Let's go to church." "How much you pay?" You know, I was like, "Whatever." And he started talking. You know, he would watch movies or something with a different theme, and I'm like, "Well, I don't get it. You know, what's going on?" And he would explain to me what's going on. And so as I watched him grow, I felt, okay, I'm gonna check this out a little bit deeper. And so the pastor invited us to go in for the members group, right? And he asked Gail's testimony, and then he asked me, and I said, "Well, I figure I gotta pick a side, you know, and I think this side's gonna be the winning side, so I'm gonna go with that." He kind of chuckled, you know. Still, no knowledge of what's going on in the Christian world. But I started to grow a little bit, very young as a Christian. Everything was happy, and the people I met everybody was cool. They were pretty normal. I was still uncomfortable, like if you were at dinner and somebody prayed, I'm like, "Oh, please pray softly. I don't want everybody to look, you know." And everybody else is praying. I would still look around, you know, but eventually I got more comfortable with it as it went. And we got to, Miles was just about 17 and a half, and he decided he was going to go into the Air Force. I was in the Air Force as a musician, and my father was Army, and my uncle was Army. He was a POW. He died in the Tycho Death March. Gail's father is British, but he has her father.
That's your wife. That's
my wife.
That's his wife.
My wife, Gail. Her father was a POW under Rommel, you know, in World War II. He was a desert rat. Her brother was an officer in the British Army. So there's a lot of history with that. So we were excited for Miles to go in, you know, and start his new life. And he even talked to his pastor. When the youth group, they gave awards when he was just leaving, when he graduated that summer. And everybody got, you know, the funniest smell award or whatever. His award was most likely to become a preacher in the Air Force or something like that. And I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. So we're about 2 weeks out from him going into the Air Force, and then a tragedy happened, and he was in an accident, and he didn't make it. And I remember that night, immediately my pastor came out, and the church family came out and surrounded us, and you know, there was everybody around us, but I thought, wait, how could this be? You know, everything is good. We didn't do anything wrong. I'm doing everything right. I wasn't angry, but I was really confused. And I would ask my friends in the church, you know, to try and help me work this out. And nobody could give me any answers. And the more I delved into it, trying to find out exactly what is it that I believe, because my mind wasn't wrapped around who this person, Jesus Christ, was or is. And I was not satisfied with any of the answers that I was getting. We even went to counselors. We went to secular counselors. We went to Christian counselors, and actually had better experience with some of the secular counselors. Well, she was a Catholic nun who married the father, so I thought that was kind of fun. I liked her a lot. So anyway, but she was really good. But she didn't give me any answers along those lines. She helped me work through some things, and I kept reaching out to the church, and it's not. I don't blame them, but actually, I thought some of the counseling was, in fact, toxic at times, and I would get angry, but I was never angry at God. I was just, I don't get it. How can this be? Miles had an award, most likely to be a preacher. How can you do this? And so I kept asking these questions, and the questions were more intellectual questions as opposed to emotional feelings, And she just happened to say, this counselor happened to say, well, it sounds like you're interested in like an apologetic response. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And she said, apologetics, she explained it as a type of preaching that would explain. I said, yeah, and then she gave me this name, Ravi Zacharias. I said, okay. So I found Ravi Zacharias, and I listened to it, and I'm like, okay, hey, I'm starting to relate, but I still didn't get any answers. But he would bring up topics of pain. How can a good God allow bad things to happen, and things like that. And through Ravi, I was introduced to Michael Ramsden, who's another great preacher in Europe. And then I just kind of went down all these different rabbit holes, but they were good, to try and explore the answers. And I was starting to find answers, but I was kind of shocked at how little, I really knew about what this is that I claim to embrace, And in a way I was kind of embarrassed, but the more I did it, the more I felt comfortable. I don't know if I was better at explaining, but I understood. I felt, hey, wait a minute, I'm not a complete idiot. That this thing is real, that I believe in. And, and the more I would listen to these sermons on pain and suffering, C.S. Lewis and all these things, my wife she's a realtor, and she had this client who was from Atlanta. And she was talking with him and had mentioned, at this time I was immersed in apologetics. I couldn't get enough. I would listen to everything I could get a hold of. I would buy books, everything, to try and to find more. I take notes as I was going. I would go on walks during lunch at school and listen to different preachers, apologetics, along those lines. And then he said, really? He goes, and then she had mentioned, yeah, he's really into this guy named Ravi Zacharias. Ravi Zacharias, huh? And so he asked me to come and have lunch with him, and I did. And it turned out that he said, well, I'm meeting Ravi for lunch. Would you like to join me? I said, sure. And I'm in Fort Myers, Florida at the time. And I said, well, where do I meet you? And he says, well, it's somewhere near Atlanta. I'm like, what? So we flew up to Atlanta, and we met with Ravi. And then I found out about there's a program in England, in Oxford. It was an 8-week program where you're immersed in the different, and they would do different topics for the 8 weeks. And when I went, there was 8 of us in this class that were together for 8 weeks. And I would say everybody there, except for one, there was a British Marine who came to Christ after the atrocities that he saw and participated in. But everybody else grew up within, with Christian families and had this big history. I would call them professional Christians. There was 2 preachers, and I still felt like, I felt the odd man out. But they really embraced me, and we would go to different lectures, and every time there was a preacher, we went to Hungary for the Christian Leadership Conference, and when we were there, every time a preacher spoke on pain and suffering, or they lost a child. That's the one I skipped to go to the book, and they're like, no, how can you do this? So anyways, the more I became involved in apologetics, the more the answers seemed to, I was more comfortable with what I believe. And then I found myself, when I'm talking with other Christians, just kind of digging around, why is it that you believe? And nobody seemed to have that answer. So through this, when I look back on Miles and being so young, so involved in the church, he'd volunteer with the church, he'd do it, to me, everything was right. And I still had that question. Why? How can you allow this? And then I happened to hear, it was several months after Miles died in the accident, Tim Keller spoke to the victims of 9/11. And it was like he was talking to me. It was amazing. It was because he said, I wish I had the text with me, but he said, there's never been a promise that follow me is easy street. In fact, it's the opposite. It says you will have fiery trials. And he talks about Daniel and men thrown into the furnace. And he talks about going through these and not being able to answer why. Sometimes, you can't define something, you can define what it's not. Like, I know it wasn't to punish me, that why did God allow this to happen? And so, after going through that experience and talking with all the different Christians that I knew that nobody really could explain, I thought, maybe this is something I could become more involved with.
Mm-hmm.
And so down the road, we started a nonprofit, a ranch up in North Fort Myers, Florida. And Miles had a horse, and he would always go, to his horse when he was down. But when he was very involved with the church, he would listen to Piper on his headphones. And there was a really stereotypical cowboy that ran the place where we kept the horses. And he was kind of a hippie, he was an atheist, and he was one of the people that believed that Christianity is dangerous. It's a terrible thing, right? And Miles would sit there and he would say, that's so stupid. And Miles was 17 and this guy is 50 something. And he would argue with him, out there everybody's in cowboy boots and I'm watching this and I'm like, Miles, don't do that. And I'm ashamed of it now, but he had no problem standing up for his faith. He had no problem sharing. And then to jump back, after I was doing music for a living, when we came to Florida, it wasn't as easy as it was out west in California. And so I took a teaching degree, or a job, and with that, I had to teach 2 classes of history, world history. I'm not a history person, but it was 9th grade history. I figured, I'll just read the book if I stay a couple pages ahead of the guys, and I'll be okay. And so the headmaster had no idea that I didn't know what I was doing when it came to world history, and I was literally, a couple chapters ahead. And in world history, it's interesting. I look back now. This was 10 years ago, so I'm sure it's even worse. But back then, in world history, you have to go through the 3 monotheistic religions, right? And keep in mind, I knew nothing about anything. And in it, they would talk about Islam, the golden age of Islam. And they would mention Jesus as, part of Islam. Okay, so in my mind, Jesus is Islam, right? They talked very, very little about Judaism except for the fact that they put the blame on Israel for attacking the Palestinians. All they were doing was throwing rocks and trying to defend themselves and try to establish their homeland. And here the soldiers were shooting them. So that's what I taught. And I taught this to the kids. And then when it came to Christianity, sure enough, the Crusades, and we talked about, I'm just reading what the text says, because I don't know anything about any of these religions. And here I am, an authoritative figure, right? Teaching young minds that, hey, and I was like preaching to them that Islam was good. And look at all the horrible, horrible atrocities with Christianity. You know, the Crusades and all this thing. They never said what the Crusades was in reaction to. They just said, and it was cherry picking all the things. And looking back with what I know now, it's frightening. You know, how it's like somebody, it was a direct attack on Judeo-Christian thinking.
There's an agenda there.
There was definitely, yes, exactly, there was an agenda. So in a roundabout, that's the story ends, not ends, but where we are now is we have the ranch in North Fort Myers, and I met you in Orlando, which was really cool. Took a while, I mean, I heard about you, and I'm like, nah, there's nobody in Fort Myers that does this,
Right.
you know, just me, right? No. So we met, and we talked to Chris Brooks, and that was cool. I was excited. And we always talked about, hey, you know, we should get together and do something. So we ended up with the ranch up in North Fort Myers, and we have the horses, and we were working with veterans with PTSD. And we do that without taking government funding, so Christianity is not forbidden, and it comes up often when we work with children. And now I'm trying to get it to where we can bring speakers. We can eventually do weekend workshops where people can stay at the ranch, and we can bring in people from all over the world to come over and to share and to really help people to express why do you believe what you believe.
Amen. That's so exciting, and I want to get back into that because I want to end it with that about your vision and my vision, which are the same visions, about your ranch, and that is to have, I went to a 3-day retreat, spiritual retreat. It's named something differently depending on the denomination. Some call it the Curcio, and different denominations, where you go for 3 days, men with men and women with women, and for 3 days, no cell phones, nothing, and you experience God. And it's powerful, really powerful, and I encourage all of you to do it. But I was thinking what a wonderful idea would be, and we both were on the same, totally on the same page, where we could have a place like yours, where we could have a retreat, where churches would pay for people to come who are called to be apologists, because there's a lack of apologists, people who were, it's a command, it's not a suggestion. The Bible commands us to always be ready to give an answer for people who have, like you have answers. Thank God, I thank God for His grace, because many people would be shut down, would shut down after the tragedy, and they would reject God on an emotional level. But thank God that you wanted to know intellectually, and not the fact that many people, including bad counselors, Christian counselors, and all that, didn't have answers, which they should have, because what you're going through is part of life, and many people go through those things, and we can help those people through answers. But the vision is to have like a 3-day retreat where people come from all around the world. They stay for free, and I already have about half a dozen wonderful apologists who said they will give their time for free, come and teach for those weekends where we have half a dozen a year, or once a month, or eventually maybe once a week. It doesn't matter, but where we can impact people from all around the world, give them a good head start to apologetics, so that they can go back and train their own churches and train their own people, so that people can have answers to people who are seeking, because people have good objections. Some people come from an angle where they're not honest and they're asking just to put down, but other people like you were seeking, and you were seeking earnestly, and you needed answers, and thank God you got those answers. But if we can train the church to give those answers, because it used to be that we had our universities, all of our universities, Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, Yale, were all founded to train people to give those answers, to be the pioneer, not the pioneers, but on the front line of apologetics. But all of the schools now have gone, so far away from Christianity. So I'm glad that you got the answers, and that you have that gift, and that you have that passion and that desire to see that grow.
Thanks. Yeah, it's shocking. I think the whole world of apologetics is changed. When you and I first met, it was the debates, the great debates, Richard Dawkins, Hitchens, and either Ravi or one of these other great speakers, was the mathematician,
John Lennox.
I mean, just brilliant minds doing that. And the idea was the people in the audience, that's who you're talking to. Like when you would go to France and you would debate the Muslims, you weren't debating to win a debate, you were debating so you could give the gospel to the people in the audience. And I think culture is, it's like, I hear this term woke a lot, and I think I'm woke, but not like that. It's after COVID, I woke up and I looked around, and it's like everybody's changing definitions. And all this, what I would used to consider would be a conspiracy theory, it's all real. And the attack on me as a Christian, I mean, it's to the point where it becomes so tribal in our country that people that I used to be able to sit down at lunch, and I had a friend who was an atheist, scientist, taught science. Great guy, though, funny. We liked the same weird movies, and we could talk. And he told me one time, he goes, "Oh yeah, I read this great author. His name is Christopher Hitchens. Have you heard of him?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "What do you think?" I think he's very smart. He can be funny. I don't agree with what he says, but And he looked at me like, "What?" And he goes, "Oh my," he goes, "You're one of," and I said, "Yeah," but we still became friends, and we could have a discussion and disagree. You can't do that now.
You can
with the council culture and everything. But I think as we equip everybody, just simple, not to do the debates, but just to have an answer for the reason.
Amen. Brother Frank, any comments or questions?
Thank you for sharing your testimony. One thing that I wanted to say, I really like that story about your son, arguing with the cowboy. And I think that's one of the powerful things about faith. When it doesn't matter who you are, how young you are, where you come from, when you have faith within you, you stand strong on your point, and you don't give up, and you share it. It's amazing. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, you could definitely tell where he was as a Christian, because to do that, like you say, as a young, I would be afraid to do it. I'd be afraid to lose a friend.
You're passionate, and people perceive it. That's the world we live in nowadays. People perceive it as confrontation and hatred.
Right.
Where in fact it's not. We should be having. I love being around with people who disagree with me. Not if I were all the time with people who nodded their heads and agree with me on everything, I'd be depressed. I want to be with people who disagree with me. Let's exchange ideas, not for me to show you that I'm smarter than you, but rather than we can both aim at truth.
Right.
Because we believe there's such a thing as truth, but the problem with society, they're redefining everything, and there's no truth anymore. They're teaching there's no truth anymore. But it's funny how they will advocate very strongly that there's no truth, except the truth that they're advocating that there's no truth, right? But then when we advocate, or that there is such a thing as absolute truth, then somehow they don't like that, But we need to restore this idea that education is all about tolerating one another's ideas if we don't agree, and seeking truth. That's the whole purpose of education, not to brainwash students, but rather to give them the information and for them to seek. And I love the story of Simon Greenleaf, who was an atheist, and he's the one who came up with the structure, the way we have it for our judicial system, how we come up with a verdict. He was a teacher of law at Harvard University. It is his way of process to coming up with a verdict that we have in America. Well, he was an atheist, and one of his students said, "Could you use your own system to look at the claims of disciples and the resurrection of Jesus?" And he laughed at him, but then eventually he did it. He used his own system, and then in the end, he said, "I have to come to Jesus. I have to give my life to him, because it is using my own system that comes to the best verdict. I have to come to the verdict that Jesus is raised from the dead, in fact, and that he gave his life to Christ." So it is not challenging. It's not being hateful to challenge each other's ideas. We're doing that because we're seeking truth. So I am grateful that there are people like you. I'm grateful that there are people like your son who was telling you, and we don't know what would have happened if Miles was still alive. We don't know. But what we do know is because of that tragedy, it really put some kind of urgency and tell me if I'm wrong, but I can only imagine, because I can't think of a worse tragedy. I have one son, and I can not imagine losing my son and Frank. Frank has 2 children. I don't think we can imagine that tragedy, but I feel like because you love your son so much, and that he really, you know, to honor what his desires were, you know, you really wanted to seek and find out for yourself. Am I correct?
Yeah, I mean, I always go, one of my favorite is going to Revelation 21, where, you know, it says, you know, I will wipe away every tear, there'll be no more pain, no more suffering, and I cling to that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I look forward to that, and I know where he is now, you know. I'm jealous of that.
Mm-hmm. Amen. Just a couple of scriptures that I want to read. That, you know, I told you, when I think of your story, the first verse that came to mind was 2 Corinthians chapter 1 verse 6, where it says that, you know, that because of someone's affliction, he brought salvation to someone else. And Paul, of all the apostles, he knew all too well that once he gave his life to Christ and was a follower, that his own suffering brought comfort to others, and light to others, and life to others, and salvation to others. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, I'll read a few verses, verses 6 to 9, and then verses 12 and 15. It says, "For God, who said, 'Let the light shine out of darkness,' has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ." That light will shine in your heart. "But we have this treasure in jars of clay, to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed." Right? You were afflicted. I mean, I talked to you. We're best friends. I talked to you. Talk to your wife. I love them dearly. But there's not one day that you don't go through, you know, for suffering, because you went through the worst tragedy possible. But I love how it says, "We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not driven to despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed." Right? So that's the paradox of the Christian life. It is in suffering, in trials and tribulations, that we come closer, oftentimes, most of the times, to Jesus. And then it says in verse 12, "So death is at work in us, but life in you." So, which, when I think of your son, that's what I think, you know. Death came to him, but life came to you, you know, through all of that. Now, it's, you know, it's comforting to know that as Christians, we know that where Miles is, because of his newborn faith, you know, and that because of his sacrifice, he had a whole life in front of him, family and kids and all the things, grandkids and all those things, but he brought life to you. And so that hopefully will continue to be passed. And then verse 15 says, "For it is all for your sake, so that as grace extends to more and more people, it may increase thanksgiving to the glory of God." So that's what I think of. I think of when I think of Miles, and I think of what, you know, he has sacrificed, and the passion he had for the gospel, that he brought life to many people through you, many people to many other people. So I'm grateful for that testimony. I'm grateful for him and for his new found life. And I encourage you guys, you know, to really take seriously Christianity, because it is so important. There are so few people who are equipped and trained to give answers to people, and yet we're all called, every single one of us are called to give answers, because there's so many people who have questions and objections, and we are called to give people those answers, because sometimes it's just one roadblock, just one, that's keeping them away from being powerful in Christ. And if nobody answers them that objection, they may never get past that, you know, that obstacle. So, anything else you'd like to say, brother? Please.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
Well, thank you. Anything, brother Frank?
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you.